we have all these API levels to work with. So once we decide which API levels we're going to target, how do we manage all that? Basically, Android provides two ways for us to manage the API levels inside of our applications. And when I say two ways, I don't necessarily mean there's a choice, but there's two things we do to actually manage that selection. One thing we do is work with the manifest, right? Android manifest.xml. There's a uses SDK element inside there. And it identifies several important things about our application. One is it identifies the minimum supported API level, in other words, what's the lowest level device you want to support. It identifies the highest API level we've tested our app with. In other words, what's the highest level of the platform that we know our application works well with. And we can optionally even identify the highest API level we wish to even support. The other thing we work with is the compiler. In most cases, we want to go ahead and compile with whatever the lowest level API we want to support is. That way the compiler makes sure we don't use anything that we're not allowed to. In some cases, we may want to go ahead and compile with a higher level API than our lowest because we want to take advantage of features directly inside of our code that are available on higher levels than lower levels. But there's a number of things you have to do that well. That's outside the scope of this series. But the thing to remember, though, is that if you do decide to compile with a higher level API than your lowest level supported version, you need to be very careful because the burden's on you not to use anything that's not supported by the lowest level platforms. We're here inside of Eclipse, and let's take a look now at using that manifest to control our API levels. So what I'm going to do now is go down here to my Android manifest.xml. I'm just going to go ahead and double click on that to open it up. I'm here inside of the GUI that sits over top of the XML file. I'm going to choose this uses SDK. Click that. Scroll down a little bit here, and you'll see some values here on the right. The first one you see is the minimum SDK or min SDK. That indicates, again, the lowest level of the API we wish to support. Now what will happen with that is that on Google Play, if someone tries to browse apps and they're below that minimum SDK, Google Play won't even show that application to that user if they're below the minimum SDK. Also, it prevents your app from being installed on any device that's below that SDK level. So it assures that only apps that you've said, or I should say only versions of the OS that you say you can support, even have a chance to access your application. The next one is the Target SDK. The Target SDK is really neat because, again, it indicates the highest level of the API that you have tested with. In other words, it's the level of the API you know your app works with. What Android will do is that if in later versions of the OS they change any behaviors, what they will do is that when they look at the Target SDK version, if they've modified a behavior, they will assure compatibility. In other words, they will make sure that the OS performs in a way that's compatible with that highest level API level you've said you know how to support. So it allows them to evolve the operating system, but also maintain compatibility with the applications that were written much earlier. The last one is one we don't use very often, which is the Max SDK version. That's saying that what is the highest level of the API that you wish to allow the app to be installed on. Most of the time we leave that blank because we want to allow the app to be installed on any version that exists because the Target SDK version assures compatibility. Where Max SDK comes in handy is that if you've decided to write one version of your application to support one range of API levels and a different version for other API levels, Google Play will manage that for you. So say, for example, you've written one version that supports 2.1 through 2.33, or another way to say it is API level 7 through 10, and then another version that supports versions greater than 10. You can use Max SDK to make sure that those folks who come in with a device that's between 7 and 10 get that one version, but other people who come in with a device that supports the higher level SDKs, those other people get the higher version. But again, we don't use that very often, but it does give us the option of being able to partition our versions of our application so that we support different API levels with different versions of our application. Just take note of the XML file itself. As we look inside here, here's our Android manifest.xml. If I choose that, this is the member we're working on, uses SDK, and these are just the attribute values that correspond to those UI fields we were seeing. You see, it's just a very simple XML element, uses SDK, and just the attributes that are on there. Let's take a look now at how the target SDK version can affect application behavior. So we'll go in here and we'll create a brand new app. So I'm just going to go File, New, and I'll do an Android application. And what we'll do is we'll just call this our target SDK test. And what I'm going to do on this one is that I'm going to set the compiler to be API level 10. Right? In fact, I'm going to set my minimum required SDK to level 10. And I'll also set my target SDK to level 10. Right? So what this is saying is that the highest level of the platform that I've tested my app on is API level 10. Right? So one of the things I just need to do here, so this compile, is I'm going to set my theme to none, just because that theme that was selected is not supported yet by the API level 10. So go ahead and click Next. And we're just going to take the defaults for all of these now. Go through there, next for the icon, create activity, and I'm just going to finish. Right? So that's going to create my new application for me. All right, so new application is created. So I'm going to go down here, and let's go down to our manifest. Right, so I'm going to double click on the manifest. Now it opened me up automatically here inside of the XML view. I'm going to go into the manifest editor view, just so it's simpler. I'm going to go to my uses SDK. Right, again, notice that we are set at 10. Now one of the things I'm going to do here is going to go to this where it says theme. I'm going to delete that line out. And what that'll do is that says go ahead and use whatever your default theme is. Right? And we'll see that this happening in this case is that by removing that line, we're relying on the default behavior of the platform. So let's go ahead and run it now. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on Run. I'm going to run it as an Android application. I'll say OK. Now I have both a device and an emulator plugged into my machine right now. I'll go ahead and run this on the emulator. And so now you see the application running on the emulator now, right? My target SDK test. Notice a couple things about it. See, it has this kind of grayish looking bar up here. It's got this kind of smaller font. And when I click on the menu button, notice the menu button's down here at the bottom. And a very simple menu just kind of pops up. And you may notice that if you've looked at more modern Android applications, you notice they generally look better than that. Well, the situation here is that even though the emulator is running Android 4.2.2 and is capable of running with the newest UI, because I said my target SDK is level 10, basically I'm saying that I've never tested my application on any UI except what was available at API level 10, which was this very simple kind of gray style API. But if I go back into my application now, and all I do is go to my manifest editor here, uses SDK, I'm going to change the target SDK version from 10 to 14. 14 is the first API level that corresponds to Android 4.0. Now what I'm saying in this point is that I know my application will run correctly on that API level. And what that tells the Android platform then is that, you're saying that you're okay with the new UI being applied to this. Right? So if I was to run it on an older device, an API level 10 device, it would still get the old UI because an API level 10 device only has the old UI. But by me saying now that I know my app will work fine on API level 14, when I'm on a device that has that UI, I'll get the new UI. Right, so let's go ahead and start this. So here's our same application again, running on the exact same emulator. The only difference is I've said that my target SDK was level 14, saying I understand the new UI. Right, so you notice here I've got the title bar up here. In fact, it's called the action bar. You notice my menu button now is up top, which is the case on newer devices. When I click on that, I actually get a little crisper looking menu coming down. Right, so again, the target SDK just told the platform that, hey, I know how to work in that environment. Go ahead and give me all the features that go with it. But when I set it to a lower level, the Android platform automatically made sure that everything ran the way I expected it to, or I would have expected it to, at that lower API level.